on my first step ever. I'm so excited to host people on this podcast because this is a podcast where we go on a journey of various people from across the globe, from different industries, from different mindsets, and from various different backgrounds. But what we discover is that what they create for themselves inside their mind, inside their heart, and how they really keep consistently going towards what they want in life helps them create the kind of life that they want for themselves, and hence they are able to build the conviction and take actionable steps towards their first steps, and then keep on taking many such first steps. So this episode is going to be very, very interesting because we have an amazing guest speaker today. He is a veteran in his field, and for a lot of techie out there, for a lot of entrepreneurs out there, for a lot of people who also love their job, who love to be in a job, or people who work at home, they're homemakers, or they're doing freelancing. Anyone on this earth, to be precise. This is what you would love to hear about, a story of a person who made it to the different areas of his life, and what he is doing today is because of what he wanted and how he came to what he wanted or what he has done in his life, so that you can take that step for yourself and have the conviction, and in those difficult moments of your life you know whom to trust. Not me, yourself. So pointing fingers at yourself, trust yourself. So please join your hands in welcoming our guest speaker, who is today's guest speaker is Kirk. So he's the CEO and co-founder of LeapSheep. This is an interesting name, a subscription advisory and startup building platform. With a background in deep technology, global business models, and human psychology, Kirk spent 12 years at Microsoft, ultimately leading entrepreneurship and venture capital relations for Asia Pacific. Now, that must have taken a lot of years to build that kind of expertise and credibility. And what he did after has been even more amazing. From 2015, returned to Adelaide to launch LeapSheep with the mission to radically transform startup success rates. Now, he's also an early stage startup investor, an entrepreneur in residence at UniSA, which is University of South Australia Innovation and Collaboration Center, where he guides new founders through the Venture Catalyst Incubation program. Wow. So you go out in the world, you create a name for yourself, you get an experience, you come back to your home, and then you create something to the next level that you can give back to the coming generation. This is an amazing cycle. But how does Kirk get to this? Let's trace our steps back to very, very beginning of his childhood. But before that, please welcome Kirk on my first step ever. Hi, Kirk. Welcome
Hi,
on my
Dan.
first step ever.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's one of my favorite topics, talking about helping people grow and learn and be their best version of themselves.
And I'm happy that you are here to do that for us. I've got some curious questions, and we are going to uncover and discover that through your journey. So, Kirk, take us through your childhood.
Yeah, I grew up in Adelaide in South Australia. I grew up in a middle income house, which was really lucky to do so. In Australia, at a period in time where the economy was growing. My father was an automotive engineer, and so I've got that sort of engineering background from him, I think, where I've got a bit of an engineering brain, very science and technology kind of focused. And so always sort of looked up to what Dad did in that space. My mum was a homemaker. She was a fabulous role model. I think I had a pretty much a perfect kind of childhood, really. Grew up in the local schools here, and I really enjoyed school. I really enjoyed science during school, and went on to university to do a science degree. I found university really challenging, mostly because I was too curious and I wasn't sort of willing to do the work, I don't think, of doing the assignments. And I'd read all the books, but I wouldn't want to sort of sit down and nut through things to get to. As soon as I understand a concept, I'd want to move on to the next concept.
Oh.
And so I dropped out of university to start a business, and I'd been. I think my parents had instilled good values in me. So I had a job since I was about 16 or something. I worked at a Hungry Jack's, which is a local fast food, McDonald's kind of equivalent here in Australia. So I got a bit of work ethic from that. And then I did a lot of interning at my father's engineering firm, which was a aluminium foundry. And he was doing a lot of the design work. So I spent a lot of time in the metallurgical lab collecting samples from the furnace and cutting up bits of car components and testing them. And so that was really my formative years, was science and technology and learning, and all the experience I had growing up, I think, around technology. I mean, we lived in such a fabulous period. You go from, TVs to VCRs to DVDs, and the computer gets introduced. Dad used to travel a lot for business, and he went to America in the early 80s and came back with a Commodore VIC-20 computer. And so I got to play with that as a young kid, and went to a computer class at, I don't know, must have been, I can't even think how old, maybe I was 10 or something, and went to a computer class with the Commodore. So I was exposed to computers pretty early. And I think that sort of set up a lot of my career trajectory. So that's at least the beginning part. I don't want to bore you with too many details, but that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of sort of how I got started. And I never really had when I was at high school, people asked me what did I want to be. I can't even remember if I had a good answer for that question, but I know in the last year of high school, I wanted to study metallurgy. So I'd been spending some time in the engineering lab at this aluminium foundry, and I was really interested in chemistry in particular. And I learnt that metallurgists were a thing, and I learnt that through that work experience, not through the school system, obviously. And I decided that I wanted to do metallurgy, but there were only 6 positions, I think, in Adelaide at the time, and my scores weren't high enough, so I missed out on that, and I decided to pursue a general science degree.
Okay.
And I think I was quite lucky. I think I probably would have enjoyed a career in mining or in that metallurgy kind of space, but I think I had a much more interesting career because I didn't make it into my chosen field.
So actually, Kirk, that kind of makes me think that looks like you were growing up in the times where that was a perfect match for the kind of a person that you wanted to be. You love technology, and that is what there was a technology boom back then. You were surrounded by the right people, and as you said, your father was in tech, and that kind of really helped you give a very early exposure to what was happening even around the world. And while we are growing up, even in a, let's say, in our early teens, or when we even reach the high school, we do have a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of curiosity. We have a lot of conflicting ideas, and we want to try out a lot of things. So from what you've told me, that you had a very focused direction of where you're going, and when you have clarity, it's easy to kind of move to the next thing and maybe actually kind of deep dive in that. But did you ever, in that span of, like, let's say from your when you were 10 to like 20, in that decade, were there any conflicting moments, because there was so much happening around the world, you love the tech field? Did you ever have those conflicting thoughts, that what am I going to do, what am I going to choose? It also sort of, the reason I'm asking this is because I think at present time it some way shows that there's so many options available that one gets really distracted to even focus on one thing to go ahead with, because the other option is so enticing as a career as well. So did you have any sort of dilemma back then? If yes, how did you deal with that? And if no, what made you so focused about things that you were?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess the dilemma was probably the fact that I thought I wanted to be a metallurgist, and then that door was closed to me. That was probably, and I don't think I was terribly disappointed with that. I think going and pursuing a science degree was still interesting to me. The whole concept of university was exciting. I was super excited to go to university, and I really enjoyed the first year. But I think realizing during that first year that university probably wasn't for me, and I guess the other conflict I had is, when I was going through high school, I didn't get particularly high marks. I got about, I think, 60 out of 100 for my final year 12,
All right, that's
somewhere in
good.
that kind of range, which, is not particularly great. And I think a lot of that wasn't because if I had applied myself, I probably could have got better scores.
Mm-hmm.
I just really easily get distracted. So I'm very curious. And so, I'm glad I didn't have internet back then, because I probably would have done worse and been reading websites and YouTube and watching other things. But I think that was the thing. It's like, am I going to make it in life? Because I don't seem to be academically as smart as what you would consider to be the best students. And so that was a bit of a sort of frightening. Like, how do you deal with that concept where maybe
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a successful person in life because my academic performance is not great. And then when I got to university and realized that I was kind of struggling to keep up, it's like, well, what do you do now? So there was a few of those moments as well. But I think the thing that really was the counterbalance to those problems and the anxiety was I was deeply interested in computers. And I think probably the other thing I didn't say earlier on is, I went from a VIC-20 to a Commodore 64, and I played lots of games on the Commodore 64 when I was, a really young kid in early
Wow.
high school. And then by the time I got into, I think probably the last year of school or the first year of uni, I was into the IBM x86 kind of PC world. And that was the moment in time when you used to open the Saturday newspaper in Adelaide, and they had a list of all the different components in the computer, like the memory and the CPU and the motherboard and the hard drive and the case, and all the prices were there, and you could literally go down to the PC shop and build your own computer based on the prices that were listed. There would be pages of this stuff on the weekend, and I used to even get the Melbourne paper, which was 10 times the size of Adelaide paper, to see what computing stuff was available. And so that helped me start a couple of businesses, which just because of my father helped me out. One was a graphic design business.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned to use an early version of Adobe, or an early competitor of Adobe Illustrator, which was Corel Draw.
Oh,
And
yes.
started doing some graphic
Long back.
design work. And I'm not an artist kind of person at all, but I'm very creative and I like the technology. So I could build pictures with Corel Draw, and I did some graphic design work, and I enjoyed that immensely. And I mostly only got that work through your dad's connections.
Mm.
And I also started a PC building business where I built PCs and sold them by buying these parts and putting them together for people like my father that were trained as drafts people, designing on drawing boards and big A0 sheets of paper and moving to CAD on the computer. And when they were buying their first computer or were being first introduced to CAD, because of my experience with Dad, he taught me, and I helped him set up his CAD computer. I started doing that for other people and making money selling and setting up computers for other people. So at that point, I thought, I'm fine. I'm making money. This university thing didn't kind of work out for me, but I'll be okay. And I think that crisis was kind of averted because of that.
This is exciting, Kirk. I see that you were already in the sort of a freelancing side hustle startup kind of a business since that beginning of your uni days as well. Now, there is a point where I would like to kind of delve a little deep over here about your thought process around that time. As you mentioned, there is a very poignant question that all of us have. If I don't do this to the standard, will I be successful in life? That
Yeah.
fear, that anxiety. How did it takes courage, in my understanding. I could be wrong. For some people, they are very decisive. I mean, they can take a decision very easily. It takes a lot of courage to say no to things that have been the norm, like being in the university, finishing the university, then going on to a job or starting your own business after you've completed your studies. But for you, it was a little different. How did you have that courage, or how did you make that decision?
Yeah. I think I was pretty lucky, and I'm not one of these people that have got a backstory of hardship where they had to overcome hardship to be successful.
Mm.
And I think sometimes, people react to stress in different ways, and you see,
Mm.
People are really able to transform themselves and be the best version of themselves by hitting kind of rock bottom and going through, great hardship. You read a lot of entrepreneurs that have got that kind of backstory. That certainly wasn't me. And I think in some ways, you look at it and go, that's if you don't have that hardship, what pushes you forward? What drives you to be successful? And I think, for me, I had an insatiable curiosity, which kind of helped. I had great safety because I never feared that, I wouldn't have a roof over my head. My parents looked after me. I moved out, but I knew that if I had to move back in or anything like that, that would be okay. So I was never really worried about if things didn't work out. I never went, I've got to make this work, otherwise I'm in big trouble here. So that wasn't driving me. It was really curiosity that drove me. And I think I was really lucky to, one, fall into the computer industry because it was such a crazy growing,
Yeah.
and this is, I think, 10 years after this, when I was with Microsoft and a lot further on down the track, I really recognized that, if you're going to choose a career, or if you want to sort of map out your plan, get into a space that's growing. What's the phrase? A rising tide floats all boats. It's like, that is, it's so true. You don't want to be in a shrinking, like, now's not the time to join the newspaper industry or the TV, industry. They're shrinking industries that are under hardship. People are being let go. Whereas if you grow a growing industry, you're going to be okay. And I think, I was okay because I was in the PC industry. That's kind of, I had a lot of jobs in my 20s before I eventually settled at Microsoft. But the theme that was all centered around the PC. So I had a graphic design business, which was, the PC, a CAD computer assembly business around the PC. And then I joined a guy that ran a much bigger assembly business. And he got involved in, the first internet access provider in Adelaide. So I was involved in that, and we did data centers and we did networking, and all this innovation drove all this opportunity. And I just literally just fell into that. I mean, it was so, so lucky. And I think the other thing that I was just so lucky with is, one, because my father was sort of interested in technology and science. I got that, from him, and I had that role model. He was in innovation, so he wasn't just an employee. He was, he headed up the research and development division for the factory he worked for, and he also had his own business doing custom race development for Group A race cars, and he even designed a Formula One engine for Jack Brabham. So having that entrepreneurial kind of insight, and he was not what I would describe as a brilliant business person at all. He was a brilliant engineer that happened to run his own business.
Okay.
But just having that as a role model, it's amazing to have that, because you hear this all the time, particularly when we talk about opportunities for women, where you can't be what you can't see. It's hard to be what you can't see. And I think, to provide people with those kind of role models is so important.
Wow. Thank you so much for being so honest and candid to begin with. One thing that I celebrate a lot on my first step ever is that we have people from all walks of life, and they have their own unique story. And we celebrate that. And I like that, that your story is a different story, as you mentioned. And what I believe is that when you have a safety net, when you have a cushion, it is easier to, kind of lag behind a bit, because then you don't have that urgency of a lot of things. And despite having that, to, have that curiosity and then endlessly working on something, which really makes a person, it brings out the quality of you, that you really are after something and you would really work for it, even if you have made, uh, a kingdom out of whatever you have. So I think that reflects in your journey even while today, because whatever you have built so far, you have built it, and it's actually enough, but you're still not stopping. Your curiosity is taking you to the next level in each step. So that is, I think, a quality that anyone who would like to keep building something in their life can always, build. If they're looking for, or they can work on. So people who are listening to us, this is amazing, I think, for even you to take away, whatever your story is, the key is to have that interest, that curiosity to learn more about your field. And another thing that you mentioned is go with the rising tide. So every young person and anyone who's starting new in the career again, in the professional, whatever area in your life, if you're starting new, it is a really interesting takeaway, I would say, that think of the rising tide. And one more thing that you mentioned over here, that you cannot be what you can't see. It's actually very true. Representation is very important. Having role models is very important. And I'm glad that you're making those important points over here. So I like to kind of quickly go back to that phase when you had just started your graphic design business. And then from there on, how did that leap happen from being your own boss, or doing your own graphic design business, to then coming into Microsoft? And why did you do that leap?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what drove me is because I think I considered myself as not having success with university and school and academic work, and so I wasn't on this path to an obvious career. Like I wasn't following an obvious career path. I didn't have a goal of an obvious career. Like I wasn't going to be a metallurgist or a mining engineer or a chemist or any of the things that I thought I might become when I finished university. And so I was sort of driven by passion and curiosity, and also I was driven to like make something of myself and be productive and prove that I could do useful things. And I think one of the things at the PC industry, the opportunities was um, I learned products like Microsoft Word and Corel Draw and Excel. I wasn't particularly good at writing, so I wasn't, writing novels or reports or anything in Word, and I wasn't, particularly brilliant with numbers, and so I wasn't, creating amazing spreadsheets. But what I could do is learn all of the functions of those applications and teach others that were better than me at those things how to get the best out of their tools. And I think this is, one of the challenges that I see now in spades as a business owner. And the more senior you are, the less time you've got. And so where I used to have this luxury where I literally sit down with the Word manual and read it from cover to cover, and then I used to go to the bookstore and buy books on how to use Microsoft Word and read that cover to cover, and you just become really expert in something, and then you become valuable to people. And so people will go, "Oh, well, you know the answer to this. You know this Word thing." And so suddenly I found that I was in demand because I had a skill that people wanted. And I think this is where this rising tide and curiosity. Like if you want to be in demand and useful, learn ChatGPT at this point in time and learn how all the prompts work and learn what are all the other great AI driven apps out there and how to use them in a way that other people don't have time to learn. Like I look at tools like Notion or Miro or Slack or any of these really popular software tools that every business should be using a version of something similar. Becoming good at those sorts of things just makes you useful. And I think that's probably something that really drove me, is just how do I become more useful than anybody else around me? And I think that's really what led me ultimately to Microsoft. Is I just found ways to become more useful, and that tends to be on the edge. I love this term that innovation happens on the edge. It doesn't happen in the core of industries or companies, or that's where the boring stuff, they want repeatability and predictability in the core of industries and companies. Interesting things happen on the edge. And so I was always looking to be on the edge, and that creates a whole nother set of problems that we can talk about. But I knew that if I was learning about these, software applications, I would be useful. And that led me to do all these amazing things in the computer industry. And then I got job offers to do other things. I remember taking a job offer and literally doubling my salary because the PC industry was growing so much. And I eventually got into Cisco networking, and I think I discovered I'd sort of tapped out my role models at sort of that point in time, because I wasn't going to be an engineer like Dad, so I wasn't following in his footsteps. And so I'd sort of got as much of a role model out of him from a career point of view as I could in some senses. And so I needed new role models. And so that's when I started, reading more and more about people that were designing and building software. And that's when I, heard about Bill Gates, and I heard about Novell, which is a networking company, and 3Com, that was a networking company. So I was buying books and learning as much as I could, and I was developing new role models then. And I guess it's the same today as if you were, you wanted to know about AI, you'd learn about, some of the top AI experts, and you'd follow them and the business people that were commercializing AI. And I think that was another thing that I was super lucky to get involved with. It wasn't just the engineering and the innovation side. And I think that's where, I always look back at my father's career, and he did some absolutely mind-bogglingly brilliant things, but I don't think was necessarily compensated for in a financial or business sense, because he wasn't a business person really. He was a technology engineering person. And I think that's one of the great things that we have going forward is the idea of commoditizing entrepreneurship and allowing everyone to be the best version of themselves and getting the most out of their skills and talents. That's something that really excites me, is so that people aren't sort of stuck in a job that other people are making money off their skills and talents. Everyone can be rewarded for what they're capable of doing. That's what really excites me.
So you have taken us on a very exciting journey of yours, Kirk. You've also given us and broken down into actionable steps of what the present generation can actually do. Anyone to say so who's wanting to, rebuild themselves as well in the present times, that what are the few things that they can do and go after is actually looking into the present times, as you mentioned, the equivalent for the PC industry or the, booming internet industries. Now it's more like AI and everything surrounding that. Once you go and study what's happening in that particular industry, to kind of read more about the leaders in that industry, what are the steps that they're taking, what's the next thing that's coming, and to become useful. I definitely read somewhere saying, it's all about creating value, whether you are in a job or you are actually creating value through your business or your freelance work, or even if you are stay at home mom who's working from home, or a stay at home dad who's working from home, anywhere in the world. It's about creating the value. And and the few things that came up what you mentioning, and I wanted to kind of delve deep into a few things, but let me just ask the one that really stuck with me, is that you mentioned because you became valuable, there was a lot of demand for you. So in this situation, when you suddenly people see value in you and everyone wants a piece of cake of you, how do you navigate that situation for yourself in your best interest, in a way you're able to add value to wherever you would like to, but also not get exhausted or overdo yourself? Or
Yeah.
do you think completely differently?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think being able to scale yourself, I think is, as you get more and more valuable, thinking about how do you scale. I think that's been a fundamental part of my career, thinking about entrepreneurship and building products. And so I remember at a time where I had all these skills and people were coming to me and for help with computers, and you get to the point where I can't possibly fix another computer. You just do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And so that's a time when you want to teach others to do what you do so you can begin to scale yourself. And so that's something that, I really enjoyed, empowering others. And I think this has been sort of a bit of a theme in my career is if you can get someone else to do your work for you, it's the best gift you can give yourself and to them, because you teach them, you guide them, you support them, they gain a new skill, and you get to delegate something. And I think this is one of the magic of being a startup and building a startup company, is you're constantly being able to offload your skills and experience. As a founder and a senior person in a startup, you have to tackle the hardest, most complex problems on the team because you've got the most skills and experience to deal with that. But as soon as you can hand that off to somebody else so that you can work on the next set of complex tasks, it's such a great value proposition for you, and it's such a great value proposition for the team that you're employing. The speed of learning is just off the charts, and I think that's just an incredible opportunity. And joining growing companies there's no better thing than joining a growing company, because there's so many opportunities. And I think that's one of the miracles of joining a company like Microsoft at the stage when I joined them, is they were just adding so many people, and it was literally, you were weird if you had the same job for more than 2 years. Like, there was literally something wrong with you if you had the same job for 2 years. People would go like, "What's wrong?" And that was such a great environment to be in.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on how you can manage or scale yourself, or manage your time when you are that valuable and you still want to help a lot of people, but time is a constraint, and how do you manage that? So that is a really interesting direction that our listeners can think upon, and maybe mold it according to their situation, what suits best out of the situation for them. The next thing that actually came up in my mind, and I'd like to quickly ask that before we jump to the next section, is you've been mentioning that there's a business mind that it takes to scale a business, or commercialize an idea, which you felt that you would seek that sort of an understanding from different role models. So what do you define that as a business mind, if you can share that with our listeners today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I was lucky. When I joined this PC company, they were a PC hardware assembly business. You'd go in there to buy a computer, and I worked for them in literally screwing together computers and installing operating systems and handing customers their new computer. But I was also got involved in sales. So I worked in a showroom where a customer would come in and say, "I want to buy a computer and I want to use it for this," and you'd have to help them make their buying decision. And should I buy this hard drive or that hard drive or this memory or that memory? And then to see those customers come back because they weren't happy with their choice, or it didn't work for them, or whatever the case may be. I think I got, and this is one of those blind luck things, is I got to be involved in the service industry. So when you're serving customers, I think you just learn a ton. Whatever, whether you're waiting tables or working behind a bar or whatever, I think that's such a valuable skill set. You just develop this customer centric mindset. And I think because we were selling custom computers, we actually had to custom build solutions for customers. So it wasn't like Harvey Norman or a store that you just go into and buy something off the shelf that's prepackaged. We actually had to custom build something. So I think that created a mindset of learning, how do you understand what the customer needs, and then how do you build something that is actually just for the customer. And so that it set off a whole mindset for me, which I think I noticed a lot of people. Even when I worked at Microsoft, I worked with some of the literally the cleverest people on the planet. I constantly felt like the dumbest person in the room when you work for a big company like that. But they hadn't had the experience in the service industry. So they from the from an engineering, because a lot of the people I work with, they were obviously software engineers and they were brilliant, academically brilliant. The IQ is like off the charts, but they haven't thought through what that meant for the customer. How would the customer think about this? And I think that had served me so well throughout my career. And one of the things I learned at Microsoft is you are not going to compete by being the smartest person in the room, so don't bother. You're going to compete with EQ, not IQ. And so you better develop that part of yourself. So that forced me down a whole nother track. And I'm a super shy introvert. And so I had a whole bunch of barriers to overcome and still overcoming around that. But learning that EQ is, in many ways as and sometimes more important than IQ. That's just served me so well through the entrepreneur journey and being customer centric.
Wow, Kirk, love that what you mentioned over here. I think this is some I've digged a hole, and I can find a lot of gold over here. It feels sort of like that about business. So this is what it means when people say having a business mind. I think one of those top things I would say is actually getting into the skin of your audiences, like, or your customers, to kind of really understand right and center, and also to understand that how they are going to change with times, and what factors can affect them as in when the times are changing, and to be on top of that. This is so interesting. Thank you so much for bringing that up, making. And I think one thing I've been noticing, you explain so well. I don't know if you've ever been a professor or a teacher, but you explain very well, very short sentences, apt words, and it's very simple. So thank you so much, Kirk. Just moving on from here, now we are coming to the end of this amazing session that we have with you today. It's nice to kind of understand your journey, from where you began to you've been just wrapped up in your curiosity. And if yes, you chose the right path to say so when it comes to the profession. I would say, as you said about the rising tide, but you've also let yourself adapt to the changes, help yourself grow. So from your journey, from your extensive amazing experience from Microsoft, to then coming into entrepreneurship, and then finally flying back to your home country to build LeapSheep. Before I ask a question about that, I like to kind of mention an interaction with you. So I think we just met once before this, and it was a session where a couple of startups were doing the pitch rehearsal, and you were one of those judges over there. I just knew your name and who you are, what you do, not more than that. And I was sitting at the back, I couldn't see any of your faces, the judges, and I just heard your voice, and you pointed out certain things, very direct, very crisp, and it made so much sense for another startup who was pitching. And I was like, okay, this man knows a lot of stuff. It just sounds that he has immense experience in entrepreneurship, and he has knowledge of various industries. So I could pick that up from the first feedback that you had given to the startup company who was pitching over there. And I extremely loved your feedback. And at that point, I was very curious to get to know you and your experience. And I'm happy and glad that you're here. The reason I'm saying this, because now we're coming to the point where you have actually built LeapSheep, and it's all about helping other startups, just zoom off from the ground level, and you help them build their startup. So please take us through that, and a journey, that how it started in Australia, and what is the future for LeapSheep.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say all of that. Yeah, boy, it's a lot. It's a lot to cover. I'll try and be really succinct. I think my last role at Microsoft was starting the startup and venture capital ecosystem for Asia Pacific. We went from 0 startups to 15,000 within 3 years, and we built 20 innovation centers, which were accelerators and incubators and technology showcase centers and all kinds of things. And that was a massively steep learning journey. And before that, I knew a lot about product. I knew a lot about marketing. I knew a lot about sales. I'd been on the senior leadership team for Microsoft Asia and presented directly to the CEO and the executive team. And so, I knew a lot about software businesses and technology. What I didn't know, and what I didn't know that I didn't know, was startups. Building something from 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel calls it, is just so different from running an established, proven business, which is definitely what Microsoft was when I was there. Even though we introduced new products, we did it in a very sort of big corporate kind of way, not like a startup way. And so this foray into startups that I had was, again, it was lovely to have a corporate Amex card and a Microsoft, business card where I could literally get a meeting with anybody that I asked, not because of me, because of the brand that was behind me. When that's a whole nother discussion, is leaving a big corporate like that where you go from being Kirk from Microsoft to just Kirk. That's a whole nother nightmare.
Yes.
Transition. But then I worked for a venture firm that was managing other people's money and investing in startups and working in those startups and building product and getting customers, and that was an amazing journey. I've done businesses in over 60 countries around the world. I've built hardware, software, embedded products. I've showed on the stand at CES for multiple years. Lots and lots of experience, which was wonderful. Became an angel investor and learned how to lose a lot of money. And through that whole journey, I realized that, and a lot of startup failure, lots and lots of startup failure. Through that whole journey, it's like, I almost felt like back at the university days where like I'm failing university, like, am I just, a failure here when it comes to startups and investing in startups? And this has been a whole disaster from a success point of view. But then I looked around me, I looked at other investors, and I looked at other founders, and I went like, I've just done what everyone else is doing. And everyone else is failing like me, and they're spending tons and tons and tons of their own and other people's capital and tons of their own time in their life, like years and years of their life, like learning these lessons, which are new to them. They were lessons that were new to me, but they weren't lessons that were new to the startup world. If you go to Michael Siebel at Y Combinator, or if you go to Paul Graham, or you go to Steve Blank, or, these kind of people that have been involved in, dozens and hundreds of startups, they would go, oh yeah, you shouldn't have done that. Yeah, that wouldn't have worked. But, we're all out there as a startup industry globally, trying these things over and over again that people know that don't work, but we just can't get to them because there's such a giant supply and demand imbalance between experts that have worked with hundreds of startups and know what to do and what not to do. There's such a vanishingly small number of them. Like Mark Zuckerberg's not one of them. Bill Gates is not one of them. He's not Steve Blank that's seen hundreds of startups. He's not Vinod Khosla that's seen hundreds of startups. And so there's just a vanishingly small number of people that actually know what they're doing in the startup world. Yet there's millions of, there's something like 1 million startup entrepreneurs every year that start. And we just pour all this money and all these programs, and we just continue to throw ourselves off a cliff. And that's what really started LeapSheep. It's like, why has nobody created a service business? Like, we're all busy creating service businesses. Why has nobody created a service business that you can subscribe to learn how to build startups? Everyone's running sort of investment models. There's accelerators and there's VC firms and there's programs, but it's a cottage industry. They work with so small number of startups. Like if you work with like 50 or 100 startups, you're a mega size support company in the startup world. And that was really the genesis of LeapSheep. Is what if we build a business model that wasn't predicated on raising a fund and allocating capital? What if we had a service that was uncapped in terms of the number of startups that we could work with? We would see more data than anybody else. We would learn what it would take. And this sort of goes back to my days about, reading books on Excel and Word. What if I just knew more about building startups than anybody else? And so that's really what we've set ourselves to do at LeapSheep, is just trying to learn more and be more useful than anybody else when it comes to building startups. And we're on that journey. It was way, 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 way harder than we ever thought it would be when we started. We've learned a lot. We've got a ton more to learn. But we're in that phase where we've got, so many customers that we've helped them do amazing things and spend their money so much better than they otherwise would have, and got to so many success milestones that they otherwise wouldn't have got to. And now we're in the process of figuring out how to scale that with software and AI. So that's the journey of LeapSheep.
That's incredible, Kirk. And while you say this, I do now realize that, yes, there are several accelerator programs over there, but I've never really heard about a company helping how really startups, really build themselves from 0 to 1. So yes, that definitely is something to think about. And for everyone who is around the globe listening to us, wanting to know more about Kirk and his journey, and especially about the startup world, do follow him on LinkedIn or on his website, LeapSheep. I will leave all the links in the show notes below. But I would like to thank you so much for your time today, Kirk. I think the last part of your journey, we really had to kind of zoom that through, but I would love to probably have you some other time when you have the time and delve a bit more deep into your startup journey, that what LeapSheep does. This one was about you and who you are, how you build yourself, and what you do inside your mind that reflects outside you, that is helping other people. So thank you so much for being on this platform. And
Cool.
as I always request my guest speakers to leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that you really resonate with.
Yeah, that's such a tough one. But I think and I don't know if this is a quote from anyone, but I think live your life to be your best self. I think that's the best thing that I think the advice I can give anyone is everyone's capable of more than they can imagine, and you've got to pursue that potential that you've got.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being on my first step ever. There were so many learnings, and for me, a lot of takeaways, many aha moments for me, light bulb moments for me, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
It was fabulous.
Learned
Thanks
a
so
lot.
much for the opportunity. It's really, really good. I hope somebody gets some value out of this somewhere.
Thank you for all our listeners for tuning in to. I'm sure if you have tuned so far, you stayed with us, you have loved what you've heard, and you learned something. So stay connected. And for before next episode, as I say, that start believing in yourself and keep believing in yourself. See you soon. Please do give ratings and please do write your comments. And you can directly reach out to me on my first step ever _IN. That's my Instagram handle. A little about myself. I have always loved performing on stage, acting, speaking, and just emoting myself. So I use these mediums different ways so that I can connect with people, help them, empower them, infotain them, which is to inform them and entertain them. If you would like to collaborate for any opportunities, more than welcome to connect with me on my Instagram handle. Thank you.